that, and especially with first generation students and students of color, where there's already, and I'm speaking in generalities here, but there's already a recognizable antipathy towards education. It's like, okay, you know, this thing is structurally designed to prevent people like me from accelerating. You know, it's not designed for people who look like me yet. But and now I'm on this I'm in this online environment where it's completely like foreign to me. I may or may not have access to a laptop. I'm using my daughter's phone to put my homework on the screen, or I'm taking pictures of written content on paper to submit to my teacher, and there's this recognizable disconnect. So,
hey, Dr. Scott Langford from the Gen Channel, joined today by professional comedian and improv artist and professor of communication, first at San Francisco State and more recently my colleague now at Foothill College, Ché Meneses, who is the first gen child of immigrant Filipinx, Latinx parents himself, and who therefore combines a deep theoretical knowledge about the future of communications in the digital age in the 21st century with an amazing empathic ability to evoke conversations with students across international boundaries, across linguistic boundaries, across cultural and religious and racial boundaries. Unlike almost anyone else I know in education, a true deep thinker, we had a wonderful, incredible 1-hour improv conversation ourselves. Please sit back, join us, and go with the flow.
Students bring with them narrative, and students, and this is like the last chapter in Zaretta Hammond's book, but when students can contextualize where they fit into the narrative or arc of the class, it gives them a stronger placement of where they are in the material. And so, and I was just thinking, like, why not apply those same principles in the lesson plans themselves? And sort of like with these videos, because I know a lot of us are new to creating online videos. What's the arc of this lesson plan? Like, where's the beginning, the middle, the end? Taking some of the concepts of storytelling and putting that into curriculum, like a protagonist or an antagonist, and then challenging students to think about who they are in this narrative that is the class. For me, that's the orality piece, and then taking figures of speech, assonance, consonants, humor, all of those elements of orality, and then making sure that it's built into the pedagogy in every single lesson plan. But at the same time, for students who are more linear and who would like the outline, who would like, okay, I need to see your continuity from this point to this next point to this next point, leveraging the best of both worlds. And I think there's a connection to the international student piece because students come from different learning styles. Marshall McLuhan talked a lot about organic, non-linear thinking of Asian countries and African countries, and the noetics of sound and beat drumming, and how there's rich data and there's rich learning in that. But Western Eurocentric thinking is very linear. It's very structured. Yeah. And so what I'm working on as far as a curriculum is saying, let's do both. I mean, for me, it's all of the above. Let me build a curriculum or a lesson plan that shows how both of these perspectives can be applied and then walk students through. And so one of the things I was doing in my adjustment in year 3 of tenure track was, okay, I have this orality piece, but how does that translate into an outline? What does that look like in the sequencing of the presentation of thoughts? And so, I was really getting some great feedback from Lauren. I was getting some great feedback from, Debbie, and that's kind of where I was before the pandemic, by the way. Before the pandemic, I was doing this. It's really interesting. A week before shelter in place, I was driving to the city, working with the San Francisco Comedy College. And so we would do our performances. We would workshop at the Filipino History Museum in Chinatown. And then we would do performances at the newly renovated. They took the brand of the Purple Onion and they put it in Kells in Little Italy. And so my last piece was this sort of combination, and it's always been this way, of fixed form speaking and improv. And I was moving the needle forward. I mean, I was actually kind of doing some social commentary stuff on white privilege. Didn't really play very well, by the way, with the folks in the marina. but comics got it. Like, comics understood what I was doing. This kind of almost the way that I would describe it is almost a Latino version of Chappelle. Like it's very matter of factly. It's very, you know, hey, there's this thing. Let's put these two ideas together and let's just talk about it. And so, but the point is, you know, as a performer and in my pedagogy, I'm really trying to look at the associations between linearity, fixed form speaking, and continuity of thought, and orality. And it's still, you know, in its formative stage. It's not like I've perfected this yet, but I definitely moved the needle forward in the classroom and getting more structure. And one of the things that I'm learning about online teaching is it's that much more important as an online teacher. I got to have structure. I got to have continuity. I can't get away. I mean, I can definitely, as a teacher, get away with that in the classroom because in the physical classroom, it's orality. You know, it's a shared experience. We're all in the same room.
Me too. Same challenge. Like you have to be more organized in an online environment and it's actually been good for me. I love that you're going for this sweet spot that's in between, you know, that combines, like don't throw one or the other out, do both. Narrative and analysis, linearity and improv, right? I was just watching, it's funny, just today I was watching one of the best online teachers I have ever seen, and I won't mention her name. It's a woman, she sells courses on how to sell your own course online, which I'm not that interested in doing to make money, but I just thought, I want to watch how she does this. I want to see, I could tell that, you know, I could tell she had this online presence. African-American woman, used to work in Silicon Valley, makes like, at least according to her, makes like more than $1 million a year now doing these courses, right? But what blew me away was how she was leveraging all of these beautiful, like her own personality, her culture add, as she called it. In other words, ADD, like what can you add to the equation? And it was like call and response. It was like she was kind of had this improv thing completely melded with a very clear structure. And I was just like, dang, I see why you make money doing this. And I've sat through so many horrible webinars in the last 4 months by those of us that are supposed to be world-class educators. And they get on these webinars to teach people how to teach online, and they do every single beginner fault and error and mistake in the book. They're like, talking heads monotonously for 3 hours, and you're supposed to teach me how to teach online? Like I'm falling asleep here on the desk. And this woman was doing exactly what you're saying, really. All right? So I'm so into what you're doing. And I think we have to clear that space, right? Because academics, right, the way academics is set up, we both know this, right? We both have our advanced degrees, all this kind of stuff. The tenure system, the same way. It's all about linearity and lack of improv. And the problem is that there's a huge cultural disconnect, and students just drop. They don't see themselves in the course. They don't hear their own voice in their course. They lose their voice. It's like, I mean, sorry for the reference, but maybe not. It's like, I can't breathe in your course, Dr. Scott, because you're trying to make me write like this other person in this linear style that does not fit me. It's like putting me in a straitjacket. And I know that I can teach them to do both, but I have to say it out loud and say it strong and say it proud. And I have to be able to do it too, right? Like I got to walk the talk. So that was my rant on that.
No, that's awesome.
Give me a little coffee and off I go to the races.
No, that seems to be where a lot of people are at, and like I always retreat to Marshall McLuhan, and it's like, well, okay, well, when I was talking about, so we did a Black Minds Matter cohort debrief on Monday, and President Tweed joined us. You know, it was facilitated by Comm Prof, and some of the stuff that we were talking about, you know, was online education, and how does it change pedagogy, and to some of the connections that you're making about the student voice and empowering students to see themselves in the class. It's challenging, and this is why I bring up Marshall McLuhan, because you know his whole premise of the medium is the message. Mm-hmm. How do we leverage the physical properties of digital technology and video so that it empowers students to do that. It empowers students to be emotionally available and emotionally vulnerable to connect in this online modality. And I don't think anyone has found that formula yet. My suspicion is it takes, it's going to be nuanced. Like I think some teachers will have to meet individually with students, and they'll have to have like an interpersonal Zoom chat. It's like, what do you want to accomplish? What are good times to record material, to not record material? How do you want to, within this array of tools that we have, whether it's Zoom or Pronto or Canvas, whatever, what do you feel most comfortable with expressing your understanding of this material? What channel or platform do you feel most comfortable with gradually becoming more emotionally available and emotionally vulnerable? And that's so challenging. I'm getting that, and especially with first generation students and students of color, where there's already, and I'm speaking in generalities here, but there's already a recognizable antipathy towards education. It's like, okay, this thing is structurally designed to prevent people like me from accelerating. It's not designed for people who look like me yet, but and now I'm on this I'm in this online environment where it's completely like foreign to me. I may or may not have access to a laptop. I'm using my daughter's phone to put my homework on the screen, or I'm taking pictures of written content on paper to submit to my teacher, and there's this recognizable disconnect. So I'm going to meditate over the summer to figure out how to leverage the physical properties of the tools and technology that we have that lends itself most effectively to people who are more oral based, to people who need to have a direct connection with their teacher. And one of the things that's on the back of my mind as for lack of a better word, a safety net in whatever I experiment with doing is serving as their tutor and saying, okay, if we need to, I'm willing to spend 15 to 20 to 30 minutes individually with you working on your paper and being your tutor and helping you work through this dialectical process through a Zoom conference or Pronto so that you feel more comfortable working with me. But what I don't want to happen is for these students to not take these classes, or the students to withdraw from classes, or just say, you know what, I'm going to do a gap year and not be part of college, and then have this year go by, and then we're still in this pandemic and they're not moving forward with their education. I mean there's a lot of structural and societal things, but the point I'm getting at, and I definitely want to hear your thoughts on this, is I'm spending my summer in part thinking about, within the array of tools and programs and modalities of online teaching, which ones most effectively complement the learning styles and the knowledge structures for first generation African American Latino students, and then how can I, in weeks 1 and 2, and even the pre-week where I'm sending that initial email, convey to them that I want to use all of these tools and that I want to learn you. That's my message to every student, by the way. I want to learn you as a person, and then in that process, we develop this is a Zaretta Hammond thing, learning partnership to navigate the next 11 weeks and work together on demonstrating understanding of course content, making strong associations between the knowledge structure that you bring into the class and the outcome that you want to take away from this class and beyond.
Yeah, I'm so into what you're saying, because like my whole life, I mean, one example that's popping to mind among many others, like this last month, the best webinars I've been to are the Black Minds Matter webinars that are nationwide with world-class African-American educators. But one thing that I see as the white guy watching, right, is that they're so leveraging like the power of call and response, the power of preaching, the power of interactivity. This woman that I was mentioning in my last rant, like she had people in the chat room, like she would say, if you hear me say, I get it, right? Like type in, I get it. And I was so engaged with her teaching, honestly. Like she had me tapping into the chat room and she was reading the names. Like, Che, I hear you, Che. I see what you're saying. Like, Che is here and Scott just typed this and da-da-da-da-da-da. And she just did it. Like she was going at this rate like this. But I felt like, man, And this works great for me, but I know that this is what students crave. Or like talk about multilingual ability, right? Like we crush our students' multilingual ability in my field in English, right? Like we've got students that speak 1, 2, 3, 4 languages, right? And we say, okay, throw out all that linguistic knowledge that you have, right? Throw out the fact that you have multicultural, multilingual abilities on 3 continents when you come into my classroom, and I'm going to make you feel like you can't write at all within the first 10 minutes, right? Because you're not writing this language called academic English to which you have never been exposed, and to which, to be honest, there's little evidence that will pay off unless you want to become an English professor and teach people to write the same way, right? So where you're going, I think, like this deep structure Marshall McLuhan critique, I think it's profound. And I think a lot of what we need as educators to learn is out there in the influencer community, right? Like I've been watching these, these people called influencers. Oh my, OMG, Stanford PhD is watching these like how to cook shows and how to market yourself shows and all this kind of stuff. But one thing I've watched is like these people teach 20 times better than I do. That's why my students tell me, oh, you got to go watch this guy here. You got to watch this woman's YouTube channel, Dr. Scott. And I get on their channel and I see, whoa, this person knows how to teach online. And I feel like the silent film star who's suddenly like in the talkie world, and I have like a squeaky voice and I haven't gone to the voice coach to talk about what to do, right? Or I'm like, oh no, we need to go back to no speaking. No speaking in my class because I'm a silent film star. So you just shut up there, like no talking in my, I don't care if we have the technology to talk, right? So I love the deep structure. I always love that you bring it back to Marshall McLuhan, by the way. Like that, one of the things when I first met you, I was like, oh my God, he loves Marshall McLuhan. Because I still think that Marshall's got it going on, right? And I'm the one that was like there. I was there for Marshall. You're too young, but I'm glad that you get it with him because I think he's still right. That the medium is the message, but the message is also the medium. If we can master this somehow, if we can learn, because people are learning everything. I'm learning to play better guitar by watching YouTube. I have been learning in quarantine to cook better thanks to YouTube. And I'm trying to use YouTube to figure out how do I be a better online teacher, because these people teach really well online. And when I want to go learn something, I go ask them, right? I mean, honestly, I'm learning everything from YouTube lately. I'm a great online learner. All right, that's my rant. Your turn. I want to show people some of these. I want to show people some of the screen captures you sent to me or the slides that you sent to me, because I thought that you're also really good at visuals, Ché, by the way. So I thought that some of your kind of Venn diagram sketchy things were really sketchy in the good way. You were sketching them. Were really speaking to me. Like I was getting where you were going because you were using the visual element, right?
Yes.
You see what I mean? Like, so I was like, oh, that, and I think if you had told this to me in academic professor speak, I could get it because I speak that language, right? Like, so we can go all theory on people, right? And we can talk about metacognitive, this and that, and blah, 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 and neurodiversity, blah, blah, blah. But I think that the visuals that you had been developing were really powerful, honestly. And so I'll see if I can find those to screen share them at some point. Back to you.
It's a thing. Like for me, I really want to launch this in the fall. Because weeks 1 through 3 are so integral to the formative process, and what I'm learning from the culturally responsive teaching conversations and being mindful of validated. Here's the professor speaking. Validating what students bring to the classroom. It's so important for me to do that inventory in weeks 1 and 2 and say, okay, who are you? What do you want to bring to this process? How can you and I work together to identify how it's of value to connect what your life experience, your aspirations, and then into our course content. And then within the next 11 weeks, let's form a partnership to make those associations, to say, okay, you're bringing in this life experience in your military work or your private sector work or raising a family or any kind of adversity you had in your life. let's take that and then build that into the concepts from our class, and then come up with a strategy on how your life experience and how the concepts from our class can inform, and even being a futurist and coming up with a strategy for even more successful academic and professional growth. And then that's going to determine the work that we do together. And so that's really big for me. And there's obviously a lot of moving pieces. ADA compliance, equity, guided pathways, culturally responsive teaching, who knows who's going to have a job, in the next academic year. I mean, there's all kind of weird things, but at the same time, what I really want to do, and so I'll tell you this, Scott, Dr. Langford, as a comic and as a teacher, my arc heading into academic year 2021 is lighter and tighter. As a comic, I want to be...
Yeah, I love that, Ché.
I want to be lighter in my material, quick material that gets to it, tighter in my bits, and more apparent continuity in thought. So I'm going for lighter and tighter, both in my pedagogy and as a comedic performer, and even the work I do with students. Like, how can the work that we put together be succinct and eloquent and articulate on that's an inventory of what they know, what they're taking from the class, and then using that information to inform what they want to do academically and professionally. And here's the beauty about doing that, by the way. There's guided pathways in that work, because if with the thing that you put on the screen there, if the student can identify the knowledge structures that they want to bring to their academic conversations and their academic work in the classes that I work with, then why not bring that into a Dr. Langford class? Why not bring that into a Carrie Ryer political science class, or a Kofi Baba computer science? They're doing an inventory of what's important to them. They're doing an inventory of their voice and how they want that particular perspective, whether it's gender identity, political identity, whatever, their academic history or language or culture, the color of their skin. They've identified that. They've done an inventory of that. I've worked with them on why it's important to them, and they can take that into the next class. They can take that to the CSU or the UC. And so for me, this thing about association in neuroscience is about getting students to create a more vivid sense of purpose and urgency to their work. And it's like, okay, how can they create a stronger sense of contextualization on how they want to apply this?
Well, what's so fascinating is I keep coming back to this great course that I watched from the for-profit course coach, right? And I didn't sign up for the thousands of dollars because, like, I'm doing this for the world. I'm not, her pitch is a lot about, and it's great empowerment for people. Like, go make $100,000 teaching, but I already get paid. So I'm just trying to figure out, like, what does she do? But what I'm keying on is one of her core lessons is that you have to start with who you are first, right? Like, that was so impressive to me. She said, I don't care, I'll teach you how to teach anything, but you have to start with your own identity. That is what makes you unique. I don't care if the market's already saturated in your area. I don't care if there's like all these other people out there teaching, but no one else is you. And I like so identified with that as a writer and so identified with that as a teacher, because I feel like that's that sweet spot over here in the center of the Venn diagram, right? Like, where what the student brings to class with what the class is supposed to communicate to them and what you individually in this one class as their teacher can bring. Like, if we can find that spot, then it literally transforms their whole education, right? Like, this too, like the best letters and thank yous that you get as a teacher that you could dream of getting ever, right, is when these students write to you years later and they say, hey, you may not remember me. I always do, by the way. You might not remember me, but like, taking your class changed me, right? And now I'm doing X, Y, Z, and I'm thriving, and I just wanted to let you know. And I know that I had mentors like this in my life, right? Like, I had a lot of them. I was lucky. But those moments where it's not just about Comm 5 anymore, right? It is like finding your voice, finding your identity. And this is where I feel like in this international context, which is not about physical borders, it's about mental borders, it's about cultural borders. and about this kind of monoculture theism that we have in the United States, where there's only one way and all this kind of stuff. It's one reason I really love your voice, right? Because, you know, you bring your parents' experience into the conversation. You bring your experience as a stand-up comedian into the conversation. You can talk about what it was like to be a student as a freshman, what it was like to be a grad student, what it was like you bring you in. And there's the Ché. It's like the Ché factor. And the Ché factor makes it exciting. And it also says to students, you can be you, right? Like, you can be you. Like, what's your thing, right? Like, Ché, I'm a stand-up comedian. I do improv. I'll add one other thing. I just had this thought I had never had before. So I had a very elite education from my freshman year forward. I mean, I came from an inner city urban high school, black majority high school, not elite, all right? But then I got like sucked up into the elite college systems, right? So I'm at Williams, I'm at Stanford. And one of the things I always feel like I would like to give more of to my students is seminars, right? Those little seminars, those delicious seminars with like 10, 15 students and you and the professor. And what I just keyed on is that seminars are improv, right? Seminars are improv because you're in there, you're having a conversation around a table. And you know, it has a kind of direction, and you know, good seminar teachers know this. And of course, there's horrible seminar teachers too. But like a good seminar is like a group improv, right? And then that leads you to write the structured academic paper, but the seminar is the fundamental foundational skill. And I feel like students that have not got that elite education advantage where we have the money to put you in a room with 10 other students, because that's tough in community colleges, right? We're all about butts and seats, as we all got to say, because that's what gets paid. That's what keeps the lights on.
Yeah.
But how do you get that improv feeling? Because I always felt like, okay, that was the essence of my education, was these seminars, right? So how do we have a seminar feeling in a Zoom room, which you can do? You can do breakout sessions. You can do one-on-ones. You can, like, all this kind of stuff. You can say, chat back to me now. Like, do you get it, right? So like just feeling our way forward through the darkness towards these techniques that could really be empowering for international students, for first-gen students, for students who are children of immigrants, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, and the rest of us too, right? Okay, your turn again.
Well, I mean, you're like preaching to the choir here, but
okay.
So you know,
yeah, we are the choir. You're right.
I know on the screen you have like the Venn diagram, and what's the irony to all of this is the impetus for me doing these Venn diagrams concept mapping and really applying it in pedagogy in the first couple of weeks of class actually came out of stand-up comedy, because the first couple of things, and this was in the last
really, talk about this. I really want to hear this.
The last weeks of me doing this was thinking about stand-up comedy and thinking about, okay, what's the connection between the comic and the audience, and why does a joke work or why does it not work, and what's the connection between riffing with the audience. And here's the key thing, and I know you've thought a ton about this as a writer and your audience and working with students, but a joke will not work if the audience doesn't have the context of this first premise. So yes. The basic joke structure is like first premise, setup, punchline. But the thing about the first premise, though, is you have to bring the audience into the context of whatever this joke is about, or else the conclusion, the punchline won't work. It's like, I don't know what you're talking about. And so for me, the impetus of using Venn diagramming for lesson planning and to encourage students to draw associations is to first learn about the students. Like, what exactly knowledge structure-wise are you bringing to this learning interaction? And then how can I leverage the course content to meet that? And the same principle works for writing jokes. It's like, okay, if I'm going to Tracy, in California, and I'm going to talk about the difference between the Bay Area and Tracy, what are some knowledge structures of residents of Tracy? Or if I'm going to like Texas, what are the knowledge structures of folks in Texas that they can refer to and have an existing context, and then thread my material to whatever that is. And that's comic. That's what comics think about. One of the things, when I talk to other comics, that they do, traveling like road comics before the pandemic, is they would always go into a new town and they'd get a copy of the newspaper. You know, they buy it and then
so smart. Yes, I love that.
Headlines like, okay, here, you know, okay, there's a bake festival, right?
Man bites dog, blah blah blah. Festival, like, yeah, mayor and scandal.
They take that information and they thread it into the material. Well, why, as teachers, why can't we do those same kind of things? Why can't we, you know, probe the audience and say, okay, what are your knowledge structures? What are you coming into this interaction with? And then leverage our material with what they bring. And so, you know, this is what we're, you know, with this Venn diagramming, it's like, why not use those same kind of principles so that the conclusion, which would be like the punchline of a joke, is that there's this outcome. There's this, okay, now we have this shared experience. We walk through this talking process together, and the conclusion that you're going to reach is an increased understanding of this original knowledge structure to build even deeper, more sophisticated knowledge structure. And
talk to me about this neuroscience part of the Venn diagram too, because I didn't push record fast enough, and you started in on that, and you said stuff that was totally fascinating to me. I am so into this neurodiversity piece in my own life as a teacher and my interactions with my neurodiverse students and neurodiverse family members, the empowerment of that and what that can mean. But I really want to hear more about the neuroscience piece from you.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting because I sent this out to a bunch of professors on our campus, and some of the feedback I got was, it's great. It seems to move the needle forward on validating and getting students to articulate their voice and how they see the material. But what in Mach 1 of this idea, of this assignment, is unclear is what exactly am I asking of the student to list as far as their neuroscience, as far as their knowledge structure. And so for me, it's in week 1, having the student do an inventory of the knowledge structures they're comfortable and they feel comfortable and safe with, bringing, self-disclosing and bringing to the classroom. So it could be gender identity, it could be politics, it could be, and that's the beauty. By the way, I want to provide a little bit of a caveat or a preface on this one. The beauty of being a communication teacher, and I would imagine some of these rules apply to English teachers, is we have the luxury of focusing on how that message is communicated. We don't have that extra barrier of like if I was a geography teacher or a physics teacher, the focus is on the physics and understanding the relationship between gravity and Earth. I'm not a physics guy, but if I was doing biology, then I would be talking about cellular models. And the point I'm getting at is it's not the focus. Like for communication, I'm really focused on how they're articulating their ideas. How is this individual articulating the credibility of the information they're using to assert their points? And I would imagine there's a lot of overlap with English. And how are you interpreting this text? And so one of the advantages that I believe we have in English and communication is we have the luxury of just opening up the conversation to all kinds of different areas. Whatever the student wants to bring in, we don't have that extra barrier of being overly fixated on this geographic content or this mathematical content. So the point I'm getting at, though, how it connects to associations and neuroscience is in week 1, I really want to learn the student and validate that whatever they're bringing into our classroom experience and the relationship is 100% okay. That I'm going to work with you and learn you and make the structural adjustments that leverage your strengths to this material. And it's easier for, I believe, communication teachers and English teachers, because English teachers are basically communication teachers. You're using English as the modality to communicate ideas.
No. This is like, I have to interrupt you with this because this is like the arc of my own career. Like, I feel like that is the essence. I think in the 21st century, English teachers have to figure out what comm teachers do. Like, I think it's just like, that's where the world is going. And I'm not saying anything that would surprise my colleagues who teach composition, right? But text-only communication is not the future. It's not even the present, right? Like, it's over. You can't do it that way. And we're not giving students a full skill set that way. the other reason that I get so jealous of you all in Comm is that I feel like students walk in the room and they have a pretty good template. I know they don't always perform it this way, but I mean, they grew up on TED Talks. They grew up on screens. They've seen great speakers their whole lives, right? Whereas I'm trying to get them to write this academic essay, and particularly for first gen or community college students who don't come from elite backgrounds, they've never seen this thing called an academic essay, right? They have no idea why it would ever be important. It's a completely foreign context to them, right? So there is no context at all. So I totally believe in my heart of hearts, including even for me as a teacher, like, look what I'm trying to do now. I've got to learn to teach in this environment. I can't just sit around and write another textbook. It's not going to fly, right? Like that might have been a career goal when I came out of grad school, but now it's just like, no, that is never going to get it. It's not going to get the job done, especially for the students that I care for the most, the ones that I came to community college to teach, right? The ones who don't have this context and this background, but yet have amazing context and background the minute they walk into the room. As I was saying, including multilingual expertise, multicultural expertise, right? The courage and the grit to even come on a campus in the first place, or to get online in the first place, and to share with their little sister, like the phone or the computer that they barely have access to enough. All this kind of stuff. Like that's why we both show up. I know I'm talking to the choir here again, because I know that's the kind of teacher you are. Give me just a little bit of a taste of what the EQ, neuroplasticity, whatever that is that hyperamnesia, hypermnesia?
Yeah.
That one I can't quite read. What is that one?
Yeah, hypermnesia.
Hypermnesia sounds like me as a gay guy. Like that's me forgetting. That's like me deliberately forgetting my exes.
Right.
Such an easy name to forget.
Yeah. So I mean, where to start on that one?
We'll start at the top. Let's just go down the list. Like, can you give me a quick? I know all of these come with like a drop-down menu that goes through 18,000 dissertations and 20,000 textbooks. But like, if you just gave a quick bullet point definition for each of those, I'd be really interested because I see that they're closing in on that sweet spot. And I think most of us know what you would mean by a media diary journal, right? Yeah. So like, I think the other things that are, and by accessibility shared household, like I think the other things in the second layer are self-evident, but this terminology is not to me. So I want like a quick hit on that.
In the 19, I'm such a devout McLuhanist. In the 1960s and 70s, when Marshall McLuhan was at his heyday, and his impetus for going back to school, I'll just keep this really brief, but he is doing in a very interesting way. He's doing a lot of the same kind of work I believe we're doing today. When we're talking about restructuring education and education reform, he was educated in Canada, went to the University of Manitoba, and they said your degrees aren't quote unquote up to academic par. So he goes to Oxford, gets his doctorate in English literature, and comes back and says, you know what? Not only do I disagree with your bullshit about what's considered scholarly and the academic framework of what we're doing, but now that I've gone to this like universally elite institution and got this universally elite degree, I'm even more affirmative in my beliefs about why the scope of academia is so limited. And what he was talking about, his dissertation was that and this really speaks to the global initiative, that scholars should also include the ideology and perspective of East Asian countries, and Africa, and how there's rich data in the noetic drumming of oral cultures. It may not be it may not translate into literate, that what we were talking about before, organized sequential information, but that does not at all mean that it doesn't have intellectual value. And so bringing that, and this is sort of the evolution of mass communication as an industry, Neil Postman framed it as media effects and media literacy. And Professor James Potter, the textbook that I'm using and in correspondence with over at UC Santa Barbara, the evolution just talks about how we're taking symbols, which, by the way, letters are. I think we always forget this. It's the seminal lesson. Letters are visual symbols for phonetic sound. Nothing more, nothing less. But it's kind of interesting to me that when we put those letters together and form words, and we put those words together and form sentences, and we put those sentences together and form paragraphs, and paragraphs together and form papers, etc., then it becomes scholarly. Then it becomes academically appropriate. But at their very basic essence, letters are symbols. And so symbols were, for me, and this is what Marshall McLuhan, I believe, was getting at, is the meaning, and how do we derive meaning from those symbols? And those symbols don't necessarily have to be visual. Those symbols can be audio. Those symbols can be music. One of my lifelong goals in education, and both in private sector, is to figure out how to leverage some of the neuroscience with advertising. Because before I got into teaching, I worked in advertising and learned a lot about metrics, analytics. I learned a lot about target audiences and about the tricks that advertising from a creative standpoint does to jingle people's minds, coming up with songs and sounds. Yeah. We are farmers, that kind of thing. And so
I could sing the song because, damn, somebody wrote a hell of a good jingle there, right?
And it triggered.
I totally agree. These advertising people, they got some stuff figured out that we gotta steal.
Right? And so how do we leverage that in our curriculum? How do we leverage these principles of it's neuroscience so that students can recall and create strong associations with material? We as a society, and I can only speak for the United States, we're doing this to sell products, right? One of the things I love about Neil Postman and Marshall McLuhan is they called it out on its face that advertising is basically a form of education. We're educating people about brand associations, right? We're educating people about social acceptance of, you're driving a Lexus, this means you're of this particular social class,
Right.
And so people, when you're watching this movie or you're buying this particular type of Apple product, that means that you're part of this echelon of social class. Why not apply those same principles to formal, quote-unquote, academic education? I believe there's a lot of space to be had there, and the baseline for that is neuroscience. The baseline for that is symbol association, how students are retaining and recalling information, and let's turn the tables. Let's take a lot of these principles that have been done onto us as consumers, watching commercials and seeing product placements in the movies and magazines that we look at, and then putting that into our curriculum. I believe that there's a lot of space for this, especially in online education, especially in 2-minute videos that shows the continuity of thought where there's an arc and a narrative. And so that's kind of, to a certain extent, some of my life's work is taking the principles of mass communication and advertising and marketing, and they call it integrated marketing communication, and putting that into lesson plan and showing continuity of thought.
What I love about what you're saying too is, like, look, you're walking the talk. Like, you bring your prior experience in advertising, you bring your prior experience in graduate school, you bring your prior experience as an improv student and now stand-up comedian. Like, you bring your whole self into the teaching realm, and that's where it can be really empowering. I'm also thinking, by the way, like, speaking of understanding media diary journals, like I was diary journaling, telling you that I've been watching these YouTube channels and these influencers and these people that say, here's how you teach online and make $1 million. I just want to teach online effectively. Like, I don't leave the $1 million aside for other people. But I feel like asking our students to pay attention to that too. Like, we're in the golden age of neuroscience, right? And so we have all of these tools, brain scans and everything else that my psychology professor friends would love to tell us about, right? So we know more about neuroscience than we've ever known by far, by orders of magnitude, because we can actually see what's going on in the brain. But we're also sitting with students whose media literacy is unbelievably sophisticated, like, apart from what they're watching. Like, they are so sophisticated in terms of what's going on their screens. It's one reason they get snarky or cynical, because people have been pitching stuff at them since the moment they came out of the womb, right? I keep waiting for these advertisers to figure out in-womb advertising, right? Yeah. I suppose they kind of do by addicting you to substances that you emerge from the womb from being addicted, but that's a whole other topic. But I think that I love the idea of telling people that they can bring themselves into the conversation and then watching what other non-academic groups do, instead of saying, oh, that's bad, like that, all that other stuff is bad, and only this gold standard, which was essentially developed 150 years ago at Oxford and Cambridge to perpetuate the colonialist, elitist education system for a tiny 1% fragment, right? And then we model all of liberal education on that. And by the way, you know, I'm a huge liberal arts and humanities fan, but like we need to lose the elitism, and we need to lose the filtering effect that constantly gives students this message: oh, you're not that, like you're not from that kind of family. Oh, you're not understanding what I'm talking about because you didn't grow up with some dad that, like, you know, subscribed to Scientific American the way my father did, right? So I was like eating Scientific American articles for lunch when I was in 5th grade, but most people aren't in a family like that, right? Lucky for me, I suppose. But you know, to presume that people have that kind of access is just ludicrous. And also to presume that they weren't taking in things that are even more meaningful is a really deep thing. All right, I'm going to give you a little time to close up, partly because I have to go anyway, but also because one of the keys of Zoom communication is we can't go on forever, and maybe we just have to come back to this discussion at some point.
I think
so what would be the Ché takeaways? Like, what do you want to really emphasize for people in terms of what you're working on, but also what they need to be working on? And if you want me to go to other slides, let me know, or or either that or I'll just stop screen sharing so you can have a little more space on the real estate here.
A really good concluding point for our talk today, and we'll unpack more. I just love working with you. You've been such an amazing colleague, and you're one of the alpha teachers on our campus. But this is what I've been thinking about most recently in looking at Zaretta Hammond's work on acknowledging our biases. And my bias as a teacher, if I'm going to be transparent about it, is I've been in graduate school for like the last almost 12 plus years in the CSU system. And so I'm coming from like you were mentioning before, a seminar, dialectical, you know, just sit down. The teacher is really more of a facilitator of a learning process as opposed to lecture style. And why I'm mentioning this as my bias is in graduate school, even in like the first like couple of weeks of graduate school, the charge for the graduate student is to figure out, okay, what do you want to study? What's important to you in your area? And then how do you want your project or your thesis to be a representation body of work of how you spent that time? Mm. And so why that's a bias to me as a community college teacher is I don't want to assume that, in fact, that was my biggest mistake in years 1 and 2, is I was making this assumption that students knew that. Like students registered for a class and they had a sense of purpose and a sense of urgency of what they wanted to do with that material. And so I'm calling myself out and saying, they don't know. And now that's the whole thing about this association. It's like, let me work with you in weeks 1 and 2 to figure out what you want to do with this material, and use not only what you want to do with this material, but draw from what you're bringing into the class. And there's the knowledge structure. The beauty about what I think, and this is all hypothetical, by the way, it's still very formative, but the beauty about this assignment is it's very guided pathways focused, because once a student does that inventory work of what they want to bring to every class, or what they want to bring to the class that the student and I work with, then they can take that into a Dr. Langford class. Then they can take that into a Professor Carrie Ryer class and say, okay, I worked with Professor Carrie Ryer, and in working with Professor Carrie Ryer, we identified my political ideology. We identified my inclinations to vote for a specific candidate in a proposition. And then when that student comes into my class as a warm handoff, I have something to work with. Just like the comic who probes the audience in the first couple of minutes, or the comic who watches the comic who went before him or her,
yes,
because that's what you're supposed to do, and say, let me learn this audience. I was given that gift of how to contextualize this new material, this material that I'm just given from the audience, and make that connection. And that's what I'm trying to do. I think there's some real space there in guided pathways. Once the student does an inventory of what they're trying to do, then we have something to work with. Then we have a baseline of context to say, how are you going to apply this when you transfer to your university? How are you going to apply this for your certificate or your associate's degree? And it gives everyone more of a blueprint or a foundation to contextualize that information.
Yeah, beautiful. Thank you so much for this discussion, Che. That was exciting. I love hitting ideas back and forth with you, and you're one of my favorite colleagues, like relatively new. But I just want to say, I was also thinking, like, I do think, I'm so proud of the hiring that Foothill College has done in the last couple of years. And what's beautiful for me is that I feel in a great way challenged and empowered and re-engaged by these discussions with the next generation of my colleagues. And it's partly because you do bring this like amazing wealth of other experiences. You're not all coming out of the same little mold. Like this is what I love about teaching at community colleges, because not everyone is not 18 to 21 coming from the same social class with the same religious background, all voting the same way. Like, it's so boring. And that's the kind of school that I went to be perfectly honest, in my college career. And I was like, oh, thank God we have something to talk about in this classroom. But I feel that way also now with colleagues. And I hope that this is one of the things that the Global Educators Network, which we're still figuring out. I mean, we're building the airplane, or the spaceship, I guess I should say, in front of this Zoom background. Like, we're building the space station while we're floating around out here, right? But there's all those pre-existing networks down there on the ground that are so beautifully represented by those networks of lights and electricity and communication networks, right? So I guess where I'm going with this is that I feel like what you're doing, and what many of my new colleagues at Foothill are doing, like, you're really exploring a completely new problem space. And it's like, how do we teach in the 21st century? I feel like we have fundamentally failed in the first 20 years to figure that out. I really think we failed. I think we're still teaching like I was taught to teach way back in that other century, right? Like the turn of that other century. And now we've all got students that were born in 2000, born in 2001, born in 2002, right? And we have got to figure this out. And if we don't understand the urgency of it, and if we don't look at the tools that are being handed to us by the golden age of neuroscience, the golden age of internet connectivity, the golden age, like all that, it's all got its downsides. We all know the critiques about addictive technologies, and like, I'm fully into all that. I am very worried about where AI is going and all that. But we either have to get in there and help drive the spaceship, or we're just gonna get left in the dust. So I just want to say out loud and proud, I love what you're working on, and the fact that you don't have it fully figured out yet. Thank God. Like, yes. That's what we have to be willing to do at Foothill College. That was the fundamental basis that made Foothill an exciting place to teach from the moment of its founding, and we cannot afford to lose that. We have got, like, they always thought of themselves as trying to figure out the next 10 years ahead of everybody else. And we have got to embrace that within the community college system and continue to be the global leaders. And how do you teach a truly diverse, truly international, truly economically diverse population, and how do we actually empower them instead of impounding them in some sort of little mental, economic, and sometimes even physical straitjacket? Like, we got to get over with that. So that's my rant back. I think for us, especially because we are colleagues on the same campus, we'll just push, like you have your expression, let's put a pin in it. And I have my to be continued. But yeah, to be continued. Thank you, Professor Ché Meneses from Foothill College's Communications Department. And I'm going to welcome you, hopefully, as a co-host for some of these conversations. I'm just springing that on you too, because I think in a podcast mode, you have a gift for bringing out what people have to say, especially students, particularly students who don't often express themselves. So I want to borrow your gift. I think you have a gift of bringing out other people's voices. And isn't that what a communications instructor is supposed to do?
Yeah.
Yeah.